Coming up next on Insights on PBS Hawaii, how can we help Hawaii's working poor? Aloha and welcome to Insights. I'm Daryl Huff with Hawaii News Now for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Hawaii's soaring housing costs, shrinking middle class, and stagnated wages can mean tough decisions for working families. Many homeless people have jobs or government support but still can't get their feet under them. Many with housing are one catastrophe away from becoming homeless. Is there a way to ensure that hardworking Hawaii residents have access to affordable food, shelter, and medical care? How can we help Hawaii's working poor? We invite you to join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. Now to our panel. Catherine Zian is a human rights activist and director of the Pacific Alliance to Stop Slavery. Recently, she has been protesting Honolulu's controversial sit-lie ban aimed at stopping people from sleeping on sidewalks in Oahu's business districts. Senator Josh Green is the chairman of the State Senate Committee on Health and the vice chairman of the Committee on Human Services. He's also an emergency room doctor who has pushed for affordable health care statewide. Scott Nakasone is here representing the State Department of Human Services. He's the assistant administrator of the Benefit, Employment, and Support Services Division. His 21 years with the department have included working as an eligibility worker, case manager, and social worker. And Trish Kajimura is the Social Policy Director for Catholic Charities Hawaii. She's worked in social services in Hawaii for 16 years and currently is responsible for advocacy and social justice initiatives aimed at alleviating poverty. And let's start with a definition. You know, Senator Green, what do you consider to be the working poor? How would you define that group of people?
This is a group of people that are living right near the edge of normal survival, where they're working sometimes 1, 2, 3, or 4 jobs, and they can just barely stay afloat. So they have jobs. They haven't fallen into a place where they are chronically and persistently homeless or needing all services. They don't sometimes get significant benefits, but they're just hanging on. So they have enough money to pay month to month survival. Food, shelter, maybe enough money for their health care and for their kids' services. But they're really just one tragedy away from tipping over into the population that suffers so terribly. That's usually what I think of.
Scott Nakasone from Department of Human Services. Is there a technical definition of this group?
You know, as far as the working poor definition goes, we have a definition that we use in terms of for our services. The working poor is defined as those that are working but may qualify for our services because their income may fall below, they may be at or fall below the eligibility limits of the various programs that we provide.
So you're talking about folks that may be making, so let's say somebody's at 80% of poverty. Roughly, what does that mean in terms of how much money they might be making?
Yeah, in terms of, as an example, let's say if it's like 200% of federal poverty level. As far as that goes, that would equate to about $44,000 annually.
For a single individual?
For a family of 3.
Okay, so that's about 2. So we have a lot of people that are way lower than that. Tricia, I mean, when you think of working poor, what kind of a family are you talking about? What kind of folks are you dealing with that are in that sort of category?
So usually it's families with 1 or 2 adults and 2 to 3 children, or possibly 1 to 4 children, and often they're just not making enough to meet their basic living needs. So like Senator Green said, they're one tragedy away from disaster, from homelessness, from electricity shut off, that type of thing, from losing their car, which is their transportation to work. And they actually seek services with us quite frequently for financial assistance with those things.
Catholic Charities. Mm-hmm. You guys actually do provide financial assistance to families? We do.
We have different funding sources with different eligibility criteria, so we can't always help everyone, but we are able to help some people with back utility payments or security deposit, that type of emergency expense.
Okay, and Catherine Jian, in terms of, you've been quite an advocate for the homeless, but I imagine that's also brought you into contact with an awful lot of folks in this category. What is the housing situation generally for folks that have this little bit of money, that are not homeless, the ones that are actually, able to have a home? Are they jammed in with other family? Are they living in substandard places, or what?
Well, I
sense
think
of it?
what we have, and I'm sure Senator Green will agree, that is we're looking at a impending crisis. We're already in a crisis. Lack of affordable housing is doing several things, among them pushing people who have jobs into poverty and creating more of a, unfortunately, houseless situation that's not going to go away. And I think defining clearly what the working poor is, poignantly defined by my colleagues here, is very necessary in order to protect this special, unique class that's growing in number.
Let me ask you, what pressures are there? What's happening that is creating this crisis as you describe it?
Well, I think many factors. The fact that there is no affordable housing, very little, that our public housing system is overloaded, and also our tax system needs to be reformed, because I think we're one of the worst states in the nation as far as taxing middle and low income families.
Okay, let me go quickly to a question from our audience, and I appreciate it from Doug. What is the threshold amount a family has to earn to have a decent living in Hawaii, and what does that translate to in terms of jobs, living accommodation, transportation, etc.? Let me go back to you, Senator. I mean, we have definitions, as Scott was discussing, of, I think that the government funding levels are at about 200 to even 400% of poverty. Yeah. That's a pretty good wage. It takes a lot of money to live here.
It takes a lot of money, and just to give you a perspective on some of the core needs that people have, Catherine spoke eloquently about housing. Everyone has to have a house. Everyone has to have some access to health care. In the state of Hawaii, to give people perspective, you have to realize we already have 360,000 people in our state on Medicaid. That's essentially free health care through the Medicaid programs, HMSA Quest, Aloha Care Quest, Kaiser, and so on. So all of those individuals are struggling with housing. They're struggling with whether or not they can pay for preschool for their children. Right. They're struggling on every level, and some of them are still somewhere fluctuating $40,000, $50,000 for a family of 4, and they fully qualify in that case for the free health insurance, and they still have all kind of other challenges. So I think somebody can be in poverty in a family of 4 with actually two adults making minimum wage, and we just raised the minimum wage finally after all these years, but it only does some, it helps some. 2 adults making minimum wage is about $42,000, and they're still going to be essentially in this group of poverty. They won't have access to reliable transportation, safe housing, any of the other things that many people take for granted.
Scott Nagasone, what is how much money can you make and still get government assistance?
Again, it really depends.
Family size, I imagine.
As far as family size, and also as far as the type of program that you're applying for. For example, we have our cash assistance programs, which basically limits the income eligibility up to 185% of FPL. And I mentioned our food assistance program, SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, that was formerly food stamps. That has a 200% federal poverty level.
So going back to that definition, 200% of federal poverty, I think you were saying was
about 44,000 annually.
So at the 40,000 amount, you could be eligible to get food stamps, for example.
And we have 200,000 people, 193,000 people in the state right now that are getting food stamps. Correct. Numbers that the department shared with me today. So these are large percentages of our neighbors and people that live in our community. It's really many people that Sometimes people are shy about talking about poverty, but it's all of our communities.
Let me go back to something that Catherine Jian brought up, and we bring it up to you, Tricia. Do you see people of basically who may a few years ago have been just fine, now that category of income they're falling behind? I mean, do you see?
Yes.
Tell me what you're observing.
Because the cost of housing, especially rents, are going up. I mean, definitely purchasing is going high as well, but we're talking about the rental market, and rents are going up, wages are not keeping pace with that, the cost of living, inflation in general keeps going up, and wages are not keeping pace. So if they're still working the same job and living in the same place, and their rent's going up every year, that can send them over the edge and not make it.
And how do these people feel about asking for help? Are they, particularly when they've been
Right,
working hard?
especially when you're working, it's very hard, and it's hard. I mean, there are a lot of. We don't have a food pantry at Catholic Charities Hawaii, but there are a lot of food pantry resources in the community, and working people are also seeking that type of assistance, which can be rather heartbreaking for them and very difficult to ask for.
Catherine Zian, let me ask you, what do you see as the housing resources that are available for this group?
Oh, it's very slim. It's very hard for my population that I'm serving right now, which is the houseless community, to access these services. Outreach is very dismal, unfortunately. Can be a lot of room for improvement here. But really, I think that the problem is that the state and the city both need to really commit to increasing affordable housing. I'm not talking about affordable housing being a studio apartment in Kaka'ako for $1,500 a month. Right. We're talking about $400 or $500 units a month for people to really amass the wealth that they need to become sustainable. We're not just talking about handouts here. We're not talking about more taxes to pay for poor people's needs. No, we're talking about affording people economic justice. That means accumulating wealth, becoming sustainable.
Let me ask this question, Senator. Let me start with you. What housing issues are we most concerned with? Is it purely affordability, or is it also are there also issues of safety and and exploitation? I covered a story once about a guy who built a structure behind his house in Kalihi made out of basically pieces of tin and canvas. You remember that? And he was renting out space, and people were paying for it. I mean, do we see those? Do you hear those kind of things at the legislature?
I do. People are very.
And as a doctor, I imagine you.
Well, I work on the Big Island in my medical capacity, and on the neighbor islands, there's a lot of hidden poverty as well. It's different kind of poverty. I think probably what Catherine sees when she's in the urban core is poverty always is terrible for people. On the neighbor islands, you do see a more rural community. Sometimes there's a little bit more kind of people pulling together in the rural communities. There's a lot of family resources there. I think people become a little disconnected in the urban centers, and that's a challenge. There's definitely exploitation. There's a lot of exploitation of the elderly, people who are nearing a time when they could get some additional benefits, but they have a very difficult time because it's really not a living, sustainable wage when you're just getting a sliver of Social Security or when you took it too early. We saw a lot of people tip into poverty when the stock market had its challenges, people that you would have never expected to have poverty. So all those things come together, and then if, God forbid, it hits you in your early 60s before you have access to health care coverage, you can go virtually bankrupt and lose incredible resources and find yourself on the edge before you've really even considered retirement. So there's all sorts of different variations on it. I would say this, we have to do a better job in all areas. The first tragic situation, of course, is homelessness, because so many challenges for people, and it's very scary to be homeless. People have other issues with drug abuse, and sometimes they're just impoverished. Sometimes they have mental health issues that they can't get care for. Then there's that whole other swath of people, like Catherine was saying, that really deserve to be able to get a small house, build up some assets so they can go forward.
Let me stop you for a second and throw this out to the panel. This is an interesting question from a viewer. Wouldn't trailer parks help us with affordable housing? This is from Shauna and Kalihi. What do you think of that, Ms. Naksoni?
Well, trailer
How do you think
parks-
people would respond to that?
I think, well, based on what I've experienced at the legislature, actually, on certain bills when I've gone and heard some of the testimony on things such as trailer parks, I think there's always the issue of security. I think there's always the issue of infrastructure, hookups. How are you going to build it? How are you going to maintain it? And of course, it's always that question of, not in my area, not in my property, not in my community.
Catherine Zian, do you think that people would respond to even any kind of housing? It was sort of like, let's think of something really, any kind, that's fine with you. Anything better than nothing.
Yeah, it's that bad. I think we cannot afford to exclude any viable opportunities for housing at this point. The crisis is so bad. as far as trailer parks, we recognize that can be marginalized in various ways and have like a lot of social bias. But there's a huge tiny home movement that's sweeping the nation right now that are they're temporary, they can be permanent, they can be movable, and they can look very, very aesthetically pleasing and affordable. And the thing is that these things can be very sustainable. So you're not paying any, you're not in debt, in other words. So you can have that time to accumulate the wealth that you need to be sustainable generationally. We're not just talking about one family during that family's lifetime. We're talking about intergenerational wealth that needs to be supported by our government. And it's high time, because there's no absolute reason for people to work 2, 3, 4 jobs even and still not be able to afford food or rent.
Let me ask Tricia, what kind of conditions are people living in who are in this group?
Well, it ranges from, like you said, those substandard living conditions in makeshift structures. There's a lot of homeless or houseless people who are working, and so they can't afford traditional housing. So they may be renting that type of place for a couple $100s a month, and that's because of the lack of affordable housing. So people are living, there's a lot of doubling up, there's a lot of living with relatives, a lot of crowding, and just not situations that are up to par.
Scott Nakasone, let me ask you, and this is, granted, this is an anecdotal question. This is not something we need statistics for so much as, do you see, for example, even just finding your beneficiaries, that they're moving around a lot? I mean, what do you experience as an agency trying to serve these people in terms of where they are living and what their conditions are?
Yeah, I think so. I think, that there are, I guess in certain populations, example for like our financial assistance group, I think there's a little more stability there, those that receive cash assistance for their basic needs. But I think like for our food assistance, our SNAP group, there is a lot of transient, I guess, behaviors, episodes for them. And I think it has a lot to do with the situation with their housing or with their situation of their housing.
So part of what you're all saying is that there's a lot of wandering around from place to place, from family to family, and so on. Senator Green, there was an interesting story recently about how the council was being asked to maybe make it legal to actually rent out renovated rooms in people's homes. And I was kind of struck by, you mean they can't do that now? I mean, do you think, and this kind of goes in line with what Catherine John was saying, is that you've got, in some ways, government resists doing things that would be a fairly quick solution because they see more problems than they see opportunities.
I get frustrated with that. Back in the previous administration, I asked the question once, why don't we take some of the schools that we're considering decommissioning and repurposing them for our houseless or our population that needs help? There are good structures, they have facilities, they have bathrooms, they have often a cafeteria, they have a nursing area, so you could do a lot of service. But there's always this classic reluctance among people in society, as it was mentioned earlier, kind of the not in my backyard syndrome. But I say it is in our backyard. If we're talking about 200,000 people on SNAP program, or 350,000 out of really about 1 million people, because we really have a population of 1.4 million, but you take aside the military and you take aside those who have Medicare, it's a huge piece of our population. It is in our backyard. So why not use some of these solutions? The government really should get out of the way. It's not going to do anyone any harm.
Let me question, Catherine John, that came up, and also Tricia might be able to get on this. How much of the homeless population is actively working? How much would you guess is, or how much do you know is actually, working at jobs but still living on the streets?
I would love to dispel this myth. Yeah, I work with the Kaka'ako population, and the going myth is that they sleep all day, they don't have jobs, and that's absolutely not true. Most of the families out there have one or more parent that is employed. They have minimum wage jobs and therefore can't literally afford, even though they're working full-time, to pay for rent for a family of 4. The average family size is 3 or 4 people. They go as high as 8. And the growing number of houseless people in that area area we see are families with young children under the age of 16. So when you're talking about not in my backyard, we don't want these homeless people there, blah, 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 you're really acknowledging that the general population is starting to succumb to a propaganda scheme, that they've fallen into the clutches of this myth that tells us that the homeless people are from the mainland, they're dirty, they're mentally ill, they're drug addicted, when actually the opposite is true. The majority of houseless people are local. There's only 6 to 8% of them that have been in Hawaii less than a year from the mainland. The majority of people are local families with young children, and a growing number being seniors at that also. So really the most vulnerable population, and we can no longer separate ourselves from this us and them kind of mentality. We're one family, we're one community. That's what makes Hawaii so special.
Let me Tricia Kajimura, from Catholic Charities, and you do the outreach, right? Or you folks do a lot of ad outreach, right?
We don't actually do a lot of homeless outreach.
Oh, you don't?
We provide financial assistance.
Okay, but I mean, in terms of what Catherine was saying, do you have the same observation that many people who come to you who are homeless are working?
Yes, she's absolutely correct on that. And the unfortunate thing, too, is when it comes to living in shelters, that often makes it difficult to work the type of whatever their employment is. The shelters have strict rules about entrance time, exit time, and it does make it hard for somebody who perhaps works at night, works some kind of untraditional shift, doesn't work from your usual 8 to 5 time. But I also wanted to add on to what Catherine mentioned, seniors, and we are also seeing that the number of seniors on the street and those who have been on the street for a while is a number that's really growing. And we're also finding that seniors are coming to us for assistance because, like Senator Green said, they can't live on Social Security. So there's also many seniors who are working poor because they're not getting enough from their retirement income.
This is really getting kind of depressing. Yeah. Senator, one of the things, do you feel that, I know at the legislature you often talk about gap group. Yes. But in terms of the needs of the currently homeless, yes, are sometimes pitted against the needs of the people who have homes and are getting some assistance. Is there that kind of that kind of policy dispute over, do we throw our resources at the homeless where there's people who are working very hard just to hold on to their homes who they need the help too?
These are competing debates, there's no question, and they probably shouldn't be. I think people live more, the real circumstances is more of a spectrum. People float in and out of anywhere in this case from extreme challenge to very darn tough times. And both of those scenarios, no one can really tolerate for very long without cracking. And then one thing happens and you go into deep trouble. But yes, at the legislature, I think one of the things that's been coming up in this conversation, which is compelling, is the visibility of a very small subset of the homeless population gives people an impression. And you see that if you walk downtown, you see some people struggling and you can't have a conversation with them, and that might be one image of that, that small sliver of the homeless population, whereas there's a vast number, hundreds of thousands of people on the edge in this group that you're discussing. So we need absolutely some critical services for people that are in so much trouble that they need immediate help. Mm-hmm. And then we have to have system-wide changes and a change in approach, like micro-housing, like just getting people the fundamental basics so they can move on, so they can save some of that money so that it passes to the next generation.
Scott Nakasone, you've been at the legislature when your boss, the Director of Human Services, comes in and says, we've got more people falling into this, we've got, and it's just factual. Here's the line, and they're falling below. They show us their income taxes, right? You know that this is happening, but, and my apologies to Senator Green, but people don't want to spend more money on this, do they?
No, and that's always, again, what the senator's saying is true. At the legislature, ultimately, it is competing priorities. It is, having to have those debates and having to decide, what's in the best of public interest. And, and for us, our role is to try to advocate and try to push for agenda in terms of trying to help the working poor, those that are falling under the poverty line. But again, with the competing issues, the competing budgetary request, our voice alone may not be able to carry that, and we need to have more of that particular group come out and support, their cause, their need.
Senator, what is the trick?
Well, the trick is that we have to turn this question on its head a little bit. It's really a lost opportunity. When you have as many as 25 or 30% of your population that's living in a category of desperation, which is what we're describing today, they can't participate in the economy. And when you don't have that large swath of people in the middle or lower middle class participating in the economy, your economy can't grow. I'll tell you why. Every penny that individuals that we're talking about, people that make virtually nothing, up to say probably $70,000 or $80,000, every penny is spent back into the economy. And that drives growth, it drives small business growth, it drives corporate growth. By having money skewed towards the far extreme, to extreme wealth, that doesn't drive much economic growth at all. And we don't ever get out of this cycle. We don't get enough economic growth because we don't take care of individuals and their basic needs. We as an economy in the state of Hawaii, never really increases the nut. We never get better. And so we end up with a finite budget all the time, penny pinching here or there for a program, when really these people should be working, they should be very productive. And if they moved up just slightly in their quality of life with another $8,000, $10,000, $12,000, the economy booms, because all of that money goes towards housing, it goes towards health care, it goes towards foodstuffs, it goes towards travel, all of a sudden. But right now there's just no money's going back into the economy for almost 30% of our population.
I'm going to read this statement from Frank on Maui, which I think is speaking for a lot of people. He says he feels, as a working poor person, he's penalized for trying to get ahead. For example, by owning a home, he sees increased taxes, insurance, etc. Owning a car sees increased registration taxes, etc., let alone the price of gas. He is looking for relief. Tricia Kajima, what do you think? Is that fairly typical? You hear people saying things like this all the time?
For sure. They feel that they can't get ahead. Catherine mentioned earlier tax changes and how our tax system is very regressive when it comes to the poor. We're the fourth worst in the nation when it comes to taxing the poor. And there's things that we can put into place to help their situation. So for example, an earned income tax credit program at the state level would put money back into the pockets of people who are working. And it especially helps with child poverty because the tax credit is larger when you have children than when you're a single person.
Yeah, I've heard that we actually take more money out of low rent, low incomes
We're
in most
taxing
states.
people further into poverty.
Right, the general excise tax is pretty regressive because
It also taxes rent, food
and medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Terrible thing to tax people's food and medicine.
So why don't you get rid of it?
I've proposed several times to get rid of it.
On those items?
The tax on medicine, for instance, the tax on healthcare in general generates about 125 to 140 million, depending on the economy that year, of dollars. And we live so near a threshold of not making the budget that people are reluctant to really change out the system. That's why it's interesting to have new administrations come in and new ideas, because just maybe someone's going to go for broke and really turn this tax system on its head. Because I feel for what Frank is talking about, some people just say, I'd rather just, if I were completely in poverty, get complete assistance with health insurance, then I wouldn't be paying anything. I wouldn't be paying a penalty for the Affordable Care Act, which some people that just got into that range where they have to buy insurance, it's pretty tough, and could perhaps get some support for food. So that's why the working poor really take it on the chin unfairly.
Well, one thing too, I was thinking, Scott Nakasone, is that a lot of what people pay for with their government benefits is taxes.
Yes, that's true. That's true. And like Tricia said, I mean, that is part of the problem with the tax system, that it is taxing the poor. But again, like Senator's talking about, I think, there is that reluctance to change or to be able to do anything about it at this point because of revenues.
Right.
We'll come back in a moment and talk some more about some very specific programs that are in place and how they might be affecting things. But right now, I want to address our audience for a moment. Tonight, we're having a discussion about what Hawaii can do to help its working poor. We invite you to join the conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. Call 973-1000 on Oahu and 800-283-4847 from the neighbor islands. I had a caller here, John in Waikiki. There's a couple of issues here where people are asking about, gee, people seem to be making a lot of money, but they're getting food stamps and Medicaid. I know a woman that has an apartment worth $200,000 that's paid off. She's getting food stamps and Medicaid. Why shouldn't she have to sell it to support herself? That's a kind of a technical question.
Well, I mean, you know, as far as, because I've heard that before in terms of some of the public outcry on that. But, you know, basically, people, even in poverty, need to have some level of dignity. They should have the right to be able to have, you know, if they are able to, fortunately, have like land ownership and have a property of their own, that's great. They should be able to. We shouldn't be penalizing them or, you know, or having them sell it off because.
So it's technically exempt from the income requirements.
That is
now?
correct. That is absolutely correct.
Okay.
Yeah, they are allowed to have and own their own property, which they are, you know, residing in.
And Catherine, John, you can imagine what the impact would be if people couldn't have a house in order to get welfare.
Yeah, anecdotally, we just housed a family of 3, and the first thing that they did really was sleep for 3 days straight because it's so exhausting to be houseless. So you have to worry about constantly being raided by the city through criminalization ordinances, and you have to constantly be looking for water and you know, being concerned with the elements. They slept for 3 days straight. And a lot of people take for granted what it's like to be houseless because it's Hawaii. People assume that they have it good because we are in paradise, and that's not true. It's exceptionally dangerous, especially for young children, girls at that. Being houseless is not a heyday. And we need to really start to acknowledge that policy changes, need to happen. This is not going to be an easy battle, but our leaders in government need to just bite the bullet and make those policy calls that change our regressive tax system to a progressive tax system, create a living wage linked to the CPI, and increase affordable housing, because we live on an island. You can't gentrify the entire island and push people into the water. It's not possible. Sooner or later, you're going to stare this problem back in the face, and it's going to be a huger monster than it is now.
Tricia Kajimura, do you think, what kind of ideas are circulating in your agency or among the people that you work with about what would be very impactful to help this particular group of people?
Well, you know, we're talking a lot about government involvement and government solutions, and that is, of course, critical, but I think there's also things that the private sector can do, in particular employers. So Senator Green mentioned, or the topic of the minimum wage increase has come up, but the minimum wage, as great as, you know, as happy as we are that it was increased, is not a living wage. And so folks are still not making enough to live on. And there are companies that have implemented living wage policies. There's municipalities that have implemented living wage policies. And I think that's something that could really help people get out of poverty.
You know, yeah, Senator Green, the question from Mike of Lihue, can Hawaii support a living wage of $15 per hour? Some places have set it that high. What's the policy impact of it? What happens when you do that in a community? Do we know?
It's good for a community. As soon as you increase minimum wage up to living wage, like I was saying earlier, the bell curve of a society, 50% of the people are living somewhere near a challenge in survival, housing, food, medicine. As soon as you increase that large group slightly to an actual living wage, they contribute to a large economic expansion. So people I know are reluctant to pay more short term, but then all of a sudden there's a much greater demand for all the things in society that people want. We're all equals here. We all want the right things for our children, our loved ones, our significant others, but most people that we're talking about today can't afford any of that stuff. So we get economic growth if we go to a living wage. And $15 is about the number. That's about $31,000 a year for an individual. a pair of people together, $60,000. Now you're talking about the potential to actually get housing, to actually have sustained health care and good health.
I know that in this group we're probably not going to get anyone who says that's a bad idea, but Catherine, let me ask you, how do you address the argument of people who hear that and go, it's going to kill jobs, then all these people who have jobs will lose the jobs? How do you address that response to the idea of a $15 living wage?
Well, personally, I think it's more of a hoarder mentality to say that and believe that, because
Hoarder mentality?
Well, yeah, like you accumulate wealth and you just want to hoard it for yourself and not spread it out, which always ices down an economy and slows economic growth, because who provides the backbone for a vibrant economy but the labor force? Now, if you're paying the labor force just enough to barely feed themselves and not even provide for rent, you're not contributing, you're not allowing for them to contribute to the economy, as Josh said. It's simple economics. And for people to say, oh, well, that's dipping into my pocket, well, you have to kind of question, how big their pockets are and how much is already in there.
I could just hear the small business people screaming bloody murder. But I mean, okay, so that's one thing to talk about, increasing the living wage. We talked a little bit about decreasing taxes that are on the poor. One of the things that someone brought up is there should be regulation of out-of-state workers coming into Hawaii for seasonal work. Is that even possible, Senator? I mean,
boy, I'm not sure that that's
protecting, I guess, setting and making sure that everyone has access to jobs and they can't be taken away by somebody coming from outside. I know that was proposed in Ariyoshi administration many years ago, but
I don't think there's much legal constitutional grounds for that. I did want to further address, though, this idea, because I think it's really relevant. Look, we do want everyone in the state to have job opportunities, and we have really low unemployment. But let's just say you own a furniture store, and you're all of a sudden freaked out because the four of us start talking about raising, wages, right? Well, yes, you will be paying all of your workers $3, $4, $5 more, perhaps. First of all, a lot of people pay in those small businesses much higher wages than minimum wage. But as soon as you start paying that, you have 20% more of the population that can buy furniture. If you're selling lamps, a lot more people are buying lamps. If you have a small medical practice, instead of having so many people on Medicaid that doesn't actually pay the medical bills that they come for, you start having more people on private insurance that, because they could afford it, reimbursements are better. So all of these things churn your own business. And that's the proactive way to get out of poverty as a society, rather than the regressive way, which is constantly just trying to put out little fires.
Scott Nakasone from DHS, let me ask this question. If you had a higher minimum wage, I mean, again, a lot of DHS beneficiaries are minimum wage workers.
Correct.
Would they literally be lifted out of the benefit system, or would they still be getting benefits while receiving
Yeah, I mean, that would be one of the fallout effects. Some of our programs, in fact, I should say most of our programs are, as far as income levels go, are regulated by federal regulations. And so unless from the federal level they decide that they wanted to increase it, that would be sort of the end product, is that, yeah, people may not qualify for benefits. But in light of that, I think it's a good thing, actually. I mean, that's ultimately what we want to do. We want to have them be able to find employment and find something that is actually something closer to a livable wage.
On this point that the caller brought up about people coming in, there's also this story that this image people have of Hawaii's welfare benefits being so generous that it attracts poor people from the mainland who know if they come to Hawaii, they can walk off the plane and sign up and get stuff. Is that true?
I'm not aware of that. Yeah,
No, it's just not
one
true.
of those, it's one of those myths, like Catherine brought up, that a lot of our houseless population is directly from the mainland, and yeah.
Well, I can tell you, look, just so people know, and because I think you hear this all the time, in every system, there are a few people, a small percentage of people that abuse the system. And people are fallible, okay? So that is going to happen, but that is not the predominant majority of individuals. I take care of this very interesting guy on the Big Island in the ER who did recently come over from the mainland, but he didn't suddenly get a bunch of free services. He's just struggling. And is it frustrating? Yes. Would it have been better if he had family members in a support system? That is definitely true. However, even though Hawaii is a generous state, and there is a lot of compassion for people, we could do a lot better. And a lot of people do still end up very marginalized, and I'm particularly concerned about the families that have been mentioned several times. You just have a lot of children being born into impossible situations. They can't get good nutrition, they can't get good education, and guess where they're going to end up? In poverty.
Let me ask Scott Nakasone for a sort of factual basis here. If a family of four, no income coming in, how much are they going to get from the state of Hawaii?
I mean, you know, they could, okay, with no income, family of four, they could possibly get around maybe around $700, $600 to $700 in cash assistance, and then that would then be factored into
Per month?
Per month. Per month.
700, 600, that's it.
That's it. That's it.
So we have some notes here. The Cato Institute, which I know is
yes.
relatively, Cato Institute, relatively conservative group, estimated that Hawaii's welfare benefits were worth about $50,000 a year.
Sure, and you know, and that report did come to our attention, and you know, the biggest factual mistake of that report is that it incorporated housing into that formula. Okay?
Oh, like Section 8 housing?
Well, sort of they sort of made the argument in terms of rental assistance in the form of the cost of rent in Hawaii, that you know that is sort of a benefit. But you know, because we have such a high cost of living, because rent is so high, of course it's going to inflate what they project would be.
Oh, I see.
You know, the level
So
of
what you're
assistance that a
saying
person
is
potentially could receive.
It kicks up the number because if you say to someone, you only have to pay 30% of your income for housing,
Right.
and then the government's paying the other 70%, if it costs $1,000 a year and $400 somewhere else,
Sure. Yeah,
it's going to look
exactly.
like a bigger benefit.
Exactly.
And healthcare the same way. If that family of four needs Medicaid healthcare coverage, of which we said earlier 360,000 of our citizens right now are receiving, the average cost of healthcare insurance is about, if you're looking at the market, about $400 per person, which means a family of four is going to be well over $1,000, upwards of $1,500 per month. Multiply that by your 12 months, you're now talking about $18,000, and these numbers add up very quickly. But I will tell you this, though, if you don't provide those services and a child has a severe asthma attack and ends up in the hospital for 2 weeks very sick, talk about bills, talk about a lifetime of poverty. It's just no way to treat people. So you have to find a solution and a balance of what makes sense, but really you got to fix the system.
Tricia Kajimura, again, Catholic Charities, do you see a lot of people getting housing assistance, or is it, because my understanding is it's not universally available.
That
it's
was
not,
my thought when you were speaking, is that 30%, that type of housing where you're subsidized and you only pay 30% of it, those wait lists are very long and very, it takes a long time. So a family coming in is going to be in a tent in Kaka'ako for quite a while before they can
because
get
they're not going to pay rent
housing.
at $600 a month and that's their food. That's
Well, that's just the cash assistance that they're going to. They'll get some food benefits, but you can't use that to pay rent, for example. That's specifically just for commodities, for food, and nothing else.
Catherine, did you want to toss in anything on this point?
You know, all this money, taxpayer dollars going into services, people criticize that, but it is necessary. I think what would ameliorate the situation, though, is to allow these families to, like I say over and over again, accumulate wealth. That can only happen with a living wage. And I'm sorry to break that to you, but and for small business owners, it shouldn't be as scary. Policy can be adjusted so that they get graduated in to paying the living wage, and we target on larger businesses that have that disposable income and have large profit margins that can afford a living wage, and then some, like Walmart. Because Walmart, actually, the more that we build, they actually suck resources away from us because they expect their employees to actually rely on state services to supplement their income. And so businesses like that is not a good, advantageous to our state business plan that we can afford anymore. What we can afford is protecting our small business owners, phasing them in later, and targeting on big business.
Scott Nakasone, let me ask you this question: do you folks I know that when you ask for people to report their incomes,
Yes.
do they report their employers to you too? I mean, do you know that there are certain employers that, because we've dispelled a couple of myths, negative myths towards homeless and the poor here.
Right.
I think that's one of the things people say about Walmart, they say about the big boxers, that they say about these big businesses, that they pay minimum wage and then they expect you to go get food stamps. Do we know that that's happening?
No, I mean we don't, but like what Catherine's saying, I mean it is possible, and it is happening. I mean because of the level of wage that they are providing,
So
their
by its
employees.
very nature, what you're saying, if there's a company that's paying people between $7 and $10 an hour, those people are eligible for Medicaid.
Sure.
Those people
Yeah,
are going to be
depending on their
eligible
family size,
for
absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
why not ask for it? Because
Right.
they're eligible for it, right?
Exactly.
I remember being in an employer before where there were people who were actually beneficiaries of that employer because they were making that appropriate amount of money. I mean, it's kind of surprising.
Well, you can be a school teacher in the state of Hawaii at the entry level,
Sure.
have a couple kids, maybe start by making $32,000 a year. You will be living below the poverty thresholds for Medicaid coverage, very potentially housing and food stamps, right? So, and that's just a shame. These are some of probably the most valued individuals. Why should they be suffering? I have a brother-in-law who is raising his 2 boys. He's a great teacher. He should never have to ask these questions. Usually what happens is, and he was an example, he had to go and he worked at the hotels in the nighttime when his children became old enough to watch themselves. And so yeah, then he was able to get out of a circumstance where he was living near poverty, but that's impossible schedule to keep, impossible to raise your boys or your daughters like you might like to. So we shouldn't be putting our citizens in this circumstance. That's why this discussion about living wage for all, raising the economy, is much better than the de facto position of trying to backfill with programs that really just keep us afloat.
Okay, so I just want another voice of a person who's affected by this. Dell from Maui. I'm a retiree. I get about $800 per month in Social Security. I'm also on food stamps. My wife is from the Philippines, but is not a citizen. She's not eligible for any help. It's very difficult to make ends meet. Let's talk a little bit about health care.
Yes.
We had so much talk about Obamacare, and now we've had every one of our governor candidates said, oh, we'll exempt ourselves. But Senator Green, do you think that ultimately this group in particular, the SCAP group, was assisted by Obamacare? I know the expansion of Medicaid, for example, covered an awful lot of them. What do you think about that? How is our health care policy when it comes to this group?
It's a big challenge. Truth be told, if you have Medicaid, you got pretty good coverage overall. But it has its downside too for the whole system, which is, as we've had these discussions about the healthcare safety net, the community hospitals on the neighbor islands, they're gradually cracking their foundations because there's no extra money. Now we're talking about 70% of all the individuals that go to our community health safety net are either on Medicare or Medicaid. Doesn't pay enough for them to fix their facilities up, to bring in new services and so on. So it's just taking one problem and putting it into another place. Long term, the Affordable Care Act needs to bring everybody up by getting everyone health insurance so no one goes bankrupt. It has to provide good primary health care so people don't have desperate crises with dialysis needs or heart failure early. All those things will be gigantic improvements, but this was really just the 1.0 version. States were smart to expand their Medicaid programs, but now they have to find the next level of solution because some of these hospitals won't make it.
That's interesting. I know a lot of doctors will not take Medicaid patients.
They won't take it, but that's 360,000 of our
That's a third of the
citizens.
population.
So what are you going to do?
And Tricia, at Catholic Social Services, do you folks get Catholic Charities? Forgive me. Do you folks get a lot of people coming in and saying, "I need money to pay medical bills"?
It's funny that you asked that because I looked at the 12 check requests that our supervisor for Neighbor Island Assistance just processed, and one of them was for health care. One of them was for someone who's employed, has cancer, can't afford the copays for her cancer treatment. So we do absolutely get people with employer-provided insurance who are in that gap where they can't afford the copays.
And actually, I think one of the impacts of, I don't know if it's Obamacare so much, but now many of the employer-provided plans are costing the employees a lot more than they used to. Catherine, what's your experience been in dealing with the homeless and the working poor in terms of medical care? What are they doing out there?
Well, you know, that's a really tough issue because a lot of policy changes were made by, Quest upon the homeless that they didn't know about. They had to re-enroll in Quest in July, and a lot of them didn't get the memo, so they fell out of status.
They didn't get the memo.
Right.
But they mailed it to the address, I'm sure.
Yeah, and that happens. So, the access not only to healthcare, but also justice and, good jobs and education is really like at a critical point with this population. And it's easy to fix. I mean, it's not that complex. There are really wonderful services like Catholic Charities that can come out there, that do come out there actually every week, that have now recently been assisting people to get the services that they need. It just really is a matter of, I think, care. Every service is different, and your service is only as good as the person at the front door. So I'd like to see more of that presence out in Kaka'ako, because while they're there, let's utilize them. Let's not scatter them through raids. Let's, take advantage of the moment, because the community is not going to go away. We can't sweep them under the rug. It's the right thing to do, essentially.
Let me throw this out now to the panel, because this is, again, I like to honor our viewers by throwing out these ideas. We've talked about a number of actual proposals that might really help dramatically. The cost of housing running away is just frightening, right? What does the panel think about rent control? Senator?
It's not so bad. It works in a lot of places. I think that one of the challenges has been money talks in politics, right? And so we saw and I don't mean to be offensive to the past administration, but development interests had a very big say. And we didn't see adequate, really affordable housing at all getting built. There's an incredible profit margin on development. Yet we also have this growing problem where people can't find basic housing. The people that are houseless are totally disenfranchised politically. The people that have extraordinary giant resources and are huge-time developers have a big say. So I think there has to be some compromise. I mean, I think that there almost has to be a social contract between people and I respect everyone in the state, but people who are doing very well, who are making large profits, who are doing phenomenally for their businesses. Some do this and give back terrifically, but I think that the social contract has to be, we all are going to give a little bit to lift the economy, but first by lifting these individuals that are in crisis.
Catherine Jian brought up this growing pressure, the income inequities. It's in Hawaii where you see, and you folks have all seemed to share the opinion that the housing price is a fundamental issue. But is it holding people back? Are people able now? Are they stuck where they are, Tricia? Are they? What do people have to do to move up in life from out of this working poor thing?
Well, that's what Catherine said about accumulating wealth. So if our working poor don't have the ability to accumulate assets, and we're not talking a lot of assets, we're talking enough to save for your next security deposit, to save for books for school, that type of thing, to just get you out of your next emergency or crisis, they're not going to be able to move up. So it's really a combination of factors and solutions that we're working for. Definitely affordable housing is a huge part of that, and we need to work on that. There's just no getting away from that. But it's going to take more than that.
Generation of education will matter. A lot of wonderful things go on in the public schools. A lot of challenges exist. But until a population gets some higher education, it's hard to break out of the cycle of poverty. If at most you get is a high school degree, you're likely to have some part of your life where you fall into at least the edge of poverty. Right. The more opportunity for each family to have one, two, or more people that get either a very good trade or skill or a college degree, you are almost guaranteed. I know there are going to be viewers who say, I'm suffering, I have a college degree, I couldn't find a good job.
Exactly, I was just going to say, I got a card right here that says that.
But on balance, if you have a college degree or someone in your family has gotten some additional education, they will be able to sustain you, to support you, and help you then have a few months where you can save, make that deposit, and you break out of poverty. If a family can't break out with some of its members, I hate to say it, but it's very unlikely we're going to see a good solution without lots and lots and lots of government assistance.
Right, no, and I totally agree with what the senator's saying. I mean, in terms of like from our department and from our division, you know, we do a lot of employment services for our recipients, and that is exactly what we need to focus on. We need to focus on being able to provide the training and be able to, you know, also work with the employer community, because that is the other area too. I mean, we can provide all the training, they can get the certifications and whatnot, but if the employer community isn't, you know, being able to buy in or being able to grow there, then we just have clients who are just stuck with certifications.
And one thing that has changed, and I know this is true for the medical benefits, but I mean, have the assets limits been rethought? I mean, can someone who's on welfare, for example, can they save money? Can they develop a savings account without disqualifying
Yes, as a matter of fact. And so, you know, when we did our changes with our food assistance program, our supplemental nutrition assistance program, SNAP, we eliminated the resources, the resource requirement, and then we did the same thing too with our financial program, our temporary assistance for needy families program. We also eliminated that, so that way we could allow these families, because that is true, they do need a chance to be able to build upon their resources, and that is one of the steps in order for them to be able to move out of poverty.
And Catherine, John, last word on this. Do you feel hopeful at all, or are you just frustrated by what you've seen in terms of?
That's a really good question. I always have hope. I'm an optimist at heart, but really, like, it's going to take some time and some good effort. We need to remember that we're all one community, and we can't afford to separate each other. I think that's the biggest obstacle in creating the change that needs to happen. The business community is linked to the houseless community, intrinsically at that.
Yeah.
The policymakers are intrinsically linked to the voters, and we all need to come together to find a solution rather than separate one another again.
Okay, thank you very much, and it's been a great panel, and we now have to wrap up. Next time on Insights, Hawaii's $75 million Race to the Top grant has spurred reforms and led to some gains in test scores and college entrance rates, but the state has a long way to go to overhaul its massive public school system and is facing criticism from public educators and parents. Some say the reforms have reduced the autonomy of principals, put more burden on teachers, while adding another set of academic standards for children to master. Is public school reform working for Hawaii students? That's next time on Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff. Ahui ho. So we're going to, after they do this...